Hello and welcome to Digital Threat. I'm your host, Sarah Ralston. In today's episode, we will talk to Assistant Attorney General Brody Burks from Texas. Trigger warning, today's episode covers topics of child sexual abuse material and sexual exploitation. I would like to thank our sponsor, Proxyware, for supporting today's episode and being part of the solution to keep vulnerable populations safe online.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'd love to start with some intros. Brody, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what got you here?
I'm an assistant attorney general within our human trafficking and transnational organized crime division. We've got about a half dozen attorneys, a half dozen support staff that work exclusively on criminal cases, and about to add a third, civil attorneys that work on some civil enforcement cases, mostly in the context of illicit massage businesses. I started my career as a prosecutor, mostly in rural Texas. I spent about 10, 15 years prosecuting cases in counties with more cows than people. And then about a decade ago, joined the office of the governor here in Texas, and I've been in the public policy space ever since then.
Thank you. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your time in big tech?
I actually started my career nearly 20 years ago working for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, spent 6 years doing all sorts of cases for them, and then had the opportunity to go to big tech. I spent 10 years at Microsoft Advertising, ultimately managing the trust and safety team, which included regulatory compliance. So that's where my passion in this space really ignited. I was with Microsoft as they expanded across 100 different countries. And so you can imagine the amount of laws that I had to read and make sure that we were following in each of the markets. And then after that, I was at Reddit as the head of privacy for a period of time. And now I'm the chief product officer at Proxyware.
Thank you. Brody, Texas just finished its legislative session. Can you tell us any of your takeaways or changes, whatever you can share from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Texas is interesting. We only do a legislative session every other year. So this was that other year. So for us, we have to really make the most of it. And a lot of times that means we're carrying over things from the last session that didn't get passed. We're trying to predict trends 2 years into the future and decide really what do we need as we go forward. The Attorney General's office works with a couple of work groups. We have our coordinating council that is a bunch of state agencies. We have our task force that is a bunch of NGOs, prosecutors, police officers, investigators, that sort of thing. But we work with them to try and think what sort of changes do we need on the rules that we have, legal changes going forward. And there were a couple of big takeaways this year. One, we always have a human trafficking omnibus bill, which this year was House Bill 1778. Sinfronia Thompson sponsored that for us. And some of the big changes that we made there were regarding how sexual assault outcries work. So we can bring in more evidence now for outcries to the sexual assault by children. We can bring in more contextual evidence to talk about what was going on in the home. Was there other violence, other bad acts? But then a lot of time we spent talking about AI and deep fakes and what does that look like specifically within the realm of grooming children, child pornography, deep fakes, sextortion with our blackmail for deepfakes with pornography. All of those things were a real hard discussion. And that's really hard. So Sarah, this is the issue that we have when we start talking to people on the tech side is how do we write a law that works in a way that both the legal definitions make sense, and I'm giving legal definitions to a judge and a jury and different audiences, but also then is something that our tech partners can actually implement or can help us with. One of the big ones this year was HB 449. This was our deepfake law. Our deepfake law had previously been really focused only on videos, and we made some changes to that. We made some changes to any visual depiction, whether it's video or photos. It had previously said it had to be created with AI, but we know that a lot of times we see things that are modified with AI, so we changed it from created to created or altered through. Kind of had a much larger definition of what AI is that machine learning, artificial intelligence, some of these sorts of things, so that we make sure we're grabbing Photoshop as well as Gemini or OpenAI or something like that. And then they made a really interesting change where they took away a requirement that we showed that there was an intent to deceive, and instead said it's content that's indistinguishable from an authentic visual depiction of a real person. And so there's some real interesting back and forth of how do we write that in a way that's then useful for people like Sarah as they're setting up policies and enforcement.
Those are all very interesting changes, especially just the context of changed versus altered. And in the space of child pornography, there's a couple of different areas that this really has intersections. So the first is obviously in the sextortion space. Any photo that you post of your child online can be taken and altered by AI to remove clothing, to depict them in videos in apps that they're not in. And I don't think enough people understand the harms and dangers of just posting a photo of your family on the internet someplace. And also in the realm of how to classify CSAM material. So there's an industry standard that is hashing, but hashing has all sorts of problems because the hash changes when the content is altered, even if it's altered only slightly. And so the deep fake arena in technology and AI has really made hashing an obsolete methodology of detecting CSAM, but it's what big tech has agreed is the way to move forward. And so that's kind of a challenge I see on the horizon, especially with the advances in AI, is how does the tech industry adapt towards better solutions in an automated way of identifying CSAM material that isn't relying on this very sort of methodology.
One of the things that we're actually struggling with is there's some interesting intersections here of the technology and the people. One thing that I am always very cognizant of is, frankly, there are real parts of my job that are awful. And one of those is dealing with child pornography. And we have to deal with that in a way where before I charge it, I have to look at it. And after I look at it, if I'm proving it up in court, I have to clear the courtroom and show it to a judge, a jury, the defense attorney, my co-counsel. And there are real psychological costs to doing that. That is not a good day in court. No one wants to be there for that. I recognize the cost that it has on me and my team. I recognize the cost that it has on jurors who didn't choose this line of work or choose this case. They just got brought in and told that they're going to sit there and watch it. And so if I can't use hash values to verify the content of a digital device or use something like that, that means I have to look at every single image. And I'm looking at it and deciding, is this a real child or not? Or an investigator's looking at it, deciding, is this a real child or not? We're having to work with NCMEC to say, is this a child victim that we can identify? Those are really hard issues, both from the tech side of it and the legal side of it, but there's this psychic cost in the middle as well that is hard to pay sometimes.
I understand that more than you could imagine. When I worked at NCIS, I got involved in special victims cases. And there was a lot of intersection between counterintelligence and trying to go through disks of people's service members and CSAM. And unfortunately, that intersection exists. There were months where all I did was sit in a secure building with no windows and look at pornography to see, is this something that has to get escalated up to NCMEC or to others to identify, is it child pornography or isn't it? And so there is a huge human cost to that. In the tech industry, I started before tech understood the challenges of seeing online harm as much as they do now. And now everybody has to sign these waivers that say, like, yes, I know I'm going to see this material. Psychiatric resources are available if they're needed, but not everybody can avoid that kind of work. And then on top of that, my experience in it, I would rather I do it knowing what I know than pass it to somebody else to do it, because like the reality is that there are predators everywhere, and chances are if you're walking around the street or you're in a farmer's market or something, there is someone there that is either a predator or adjacent to a predator, because that is the world that we live in today. There's this lack of trust in who else is going to see this content, how are they going to react to it. Studies have also shown there's maybe a 16 to 18 month expiration for how long people can be experiencing that type of content before the psychological impacts are far too great and start to have real impacts on relationships, families, marriages, etc.
I talk a lot about this when I talk to groups, especially investigators that are looking at this kind of content. I had to take a career break. So I did all of my prosecution, lots of child sexual assault cases, worked in the governor's office, and then I spent 3 years doing nuclear waste disposal policy. Something completely different. Nuclear waste was kind of a less scary option to me at that time. But one thing that I am really excited about is we are increasingly seeing tools from technology, a whole bunch of different places, that allow us to do some of this screening on a preliminary basis using machine learning tools. And so it can go through a phone dump and say, hey, you don't even have to look at these. These, like, we know are adult pornography. We can tell that these are that it's AI created. These are the ones that we think are actually children. And then, even if you can't use a direct hash value, maybe I can start matching it against other known series. In the world, there are some very well-known series of photographs. And so then you can start doing that and really using those tools to our advantage and not having to our investigators and lawyers to that content.
I love that you say you took a career break. I often pass over this part of my experience because it's not relevant in digital trust and safety. But when I got out of the Navy, I thought, how far away can I get from this particular life and seeing the things that I've seen? And so I spent 3 years working as a marketing strategist for Christian nonprofits, which, if you go from CSAM, that is about as far as you could possibly get away from that kind of work. And then ultimately, life led me back. I think I have a calling to do this kind of work and protect people and do what I can to make the internet safer and to protect childhood innocence. But it does have a real cost, and you can't do it forever. And on the tools note, we recently did a podcast interview that'll be coming out soon with Peak's CEO, Maya Hope. And Peak is an AI that is designed to detect CSAM, and it is actually approved through the Department of Homeland Security to train their AI on CSAM material. So they're an emerging technology. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in this space to see how tools like that can increasingly reduce the human cost and just the human exposure. Because one thing that we haven't much mentioned here, there's the cost for those of us who have to see it, but there's also a cost for that child knowing how many of us have to see it. And so, how do we reduce both costs at the same time by using technology to our advantage?
That's something that I often emphasize to juries, is what you're looking at is really the documentation of a child sexual assault. And so the better we can stand up for those victims as well.
That's a fantastic note to add in there. I want to go back just to some of the legal changes. What do you expect the outcomes will be from some of these changes? Are you expecting tech to work with you? Are you expecting pushback? What's something that you are hoping come? Give us your best case scenario. What are these changes going to do? And then give us more of a reality of how do we expect companies to kind of work with these laws?
Yeah, so the best case scenario is a lot of what we are trying to do is write laws in a way that we frankly don't need tech companies to do much more than respond to legal service, right? If we have a search warrant that we can issue for you, give us the things that are responsive to the search warrant and let us take it from there. So if we can make changes to definitions or our statutes, then with what tech is already doing, responding well to subpoenas and search warrants and that kind of information, and we can take it from there. To me, that's a best case scenario. Again, I control that all in-house. It becomes very clear what I need from a tech company, right? I think more realistically, what we are going to have to do is have more conversations back and forth about some of the technical, okay, what came in and what came out, right? I need to know not necessarily what the tech company is doing in the middle, but I need to know what came into them and what their output was. And if magic happens in the middle of it, I can deal with that. But I need more information, inputs, outputs. What are the guardrails, right? Did someone have to defeat a no child pornography guardrail? We know that sort of the longer you have conversations with generative AI, those guardrails can start to break down. You can start pushing at the edges. What did that look like, right? So for me, actually in court, one of the great things is if I can show how a defendant really had to push at those guardrails to make AI do something like that, the better off I can say, look, there was no mistake here, right? This is someone who was a nefarious actor from the very beginning. This is what they had in mind. So the better off I can understand what those guardrails are, how it's actually getting defeated, because I know many of these, most of these, all of these companies, they really are concerned with doing the right thing. I just need to know how we're getting to some of this output so that I can put the onus on the right person, which is my criminal defendant.
Sarah, on the tech side, from your perspective, having to read and be compliant with these laws, tell us a little bit about how you would read a law like this or how you would read these changes.
Tech complying with laws is a game of risk. In the compliance space, it's always measuring what is the risk of doing something or not, and what is the business cost, both in dollars to fund whatever that change or thing may be, as well as impact to revenue numbers, users from implementing things that are required by law. So the Texas law on age verification is a good example of this, where in order to put an age gate barrier in front of content, there is going to be a natural drop in viewership to adult material, because even legal adults who are over 18 are not going to always want to give their ID to access that type of content. And so from a tech perspective, you're balancing what is the cost to the business to comply versus what is the risk to the business to not comply. And depending on the state and how aggressive they are in regulatory enforcement, that changes that risk variable. For people like me in these kind of roles, I have to justify the compliance costs as they go up the chain. And so the more that there is enforcement mechanisms in place, the easier it is for me in those kind of roles to be able to justify those costs. I am a huge fan of the tech industry. I think that it has created a wonderful mechanism to engage with each other and connect all over the world. But I also recognize that these are businesses who are beholden to shareholders and profits and whatever else. And so there's a lot of pushback on things that are unduly burdensome for tech companies. And as tech evolves, my hope is that the number of things that are burdensome becomes less and less, because we have more technology at our hands to be able to sort through data or find these various images or who's behind it. Reading these kind of laws, I think there's always people like me in a tech company who want to do the right thing, who want to protect people, who are there in that role because that is their calling. And so it is a very symbiotic relationship, understanding what does the law say, what does the law intend but not say, and then what is not in either of those two categories. And the hardest part for me was always, what did the law intend but doesn't say? Because I can't force a company to do that.
So actually, this is a conversation that I was having with a coworker today before we joined. So that new deepfake law, one of the things that it says is that if it appears to a reasonable person to depict a real person, indistinguishable from an authentic visual depiction of the real person. So here's the question that we don't know the answer to. Does that mean, does real person mean an identifiable human being? Somebody with a name, a social security number, a date of birth? Or does real person in this context just mean somebody that's indistinguishable from a photo of a real person, right? Can a real person be an entirely digital real person that's indistinguishable from somebody, anybody, we don't know who? These are the questions. In this case, it's obvious that from watching the hearings, participating in the hearings, talking with the legislators who drafted this, what they mean is an identifiable real person, like a natural person. But that's not necessarily what the statute says, and so now we're all trying to figure out, okay, oops, now that we have this language, what does the language actually mean? We thought we knew when we were drafting it, but on further reflection, there's always things that we can push and poke on, and so some of this is figuring out how we interact with Sarah and how she interacts with us, and there's a lot of learning that we all have to do, and we recognize that, and sometimes these statutes iterate along the way.
And to talk about the tech side of unduly burdensome, who decides what is indistinguishable from a real person? Is it a person that has to decide that? Is it a machine who can decide that? But if you mean an actual real person who has an identity in the physical world, how is a machine or a person going to determine that an image of somebody or a video of somebody is actually a real person? You start to build these arguments within tech of there's no way to comply with such a law, certainly not at scale, unless you have an ID of a person and you're saying, can you, person, reasonably say that that is this individual? Then it's a little bit easier. But on a mass scale CSAM prevention or non-consensual content prevention, there would be no easy way to comply with such a law.
Sometimes we've found we have to have intermediaries like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Like, I can't do this directly. The tech companies can't do it directly. We have to have that intermediary. So NCMEC's a great example with their Take It Down program, which allows someone to say, hey, this is non-consensual pornography of me that's being posted. This is child pornography, something like that. And really use them to mediate that contact between law enforcement and tech. It's somebody that can work both sides and make sure that we're all speaking the same language.
You are both very well versed in this, but can you just give me a few bullet points for the parents that are going to listen to this? Like, what are the material effects to their life based on the changes that you're hoping for? Because I think this all sounds wonderful. And obviously, the two of you are the good people trying to work in favor of the kids and trying to help as much as you can. But what are some material differences that parents can at least hold on to? And then if there's any kind of call to action for them of maybe it's talking to their kids more, what can you kind of speak into there?
Yeah, so I've got a 13-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy at home. So this is the reality that I am living every single day. So when I talk about these issues, there's some advice that I give. So one, teenage brains are like, they are biologically programmed to make bad decisions really quickly, unfortunately. Our occasional visits to the ER show how that happens, right? And so we have to give kids tools, and we have to have those conversations way ahead of time, because they're going to make poor decisions very quickly if they're trying to make them in the heat of the moment. The things that I talk with parents and community groups about are making sure that kids have an exit plan, that they've previously identified who it is that they can talk to, who it is that they can trust, how would they approach them. And if they know that, then when they have someone who's extorting them being like, now, and creating that sense of urgency, they've already created extra time because they know what they're doing. We have to convey to them that there is help out there. It used to be we told kids, oh, if you send a nude pic, it's on the internet forever. That's hopeless. There's no hope involved. So what we tell them instead is there is hope. You lose control of it, and you shouldn't do that for a variety of reasons, but there are things we can do. We can go to NCMEC, we can use Take It Down, we can go to the police, we can do these investigations, and we can do that. And then the last thing that I really talk about is you have to make sure that your kids commit to stopping the spread of it. because there's a lot of things that we can do on the big tech side that will just be defeated through text messages or encrypted messaging apps. So the thing that I've told my son is, look, if you can't come to me for whatever reason, the thing that you have to do is whatever you see on your device has to die on your device. You just have to delete it and make sure that you are not part of that problem moving on. So those are the big takeaways that I talk with parents about how to interact with someone.
Yeah, I would say the sense of community is a big part of that. You have to have a tribe. Human beings are meant to be a social group, and that's why things like sextortion work so well because they take away your tribe. They create that urgency and then they create the shame of if you don't comply, I will post it on your social network. I will tell your parents. It is the fear that drives children to make mistakes and engage further in that kind of content, to give money over, or in unfortunately far too many cases, end their own lives. It is the hopelessness and fear. And so by building that sense of community and also normalizing these topics with your kids, it's critically important to do. And it's uncomfortable. Look, I get it. I have five boys. They're between 9 and 17, almost 18. And I get it. These are not easy conversations for people to have with their children. Kids are asking these kind of uncomfortable questions far too early because no matter how you hold values in your own house, or if you give your kid a device like Bark, they have an infinite number of other devices and they have friends who also have knowledge, information, and the internet. And so, if you're not willing to have that really uncomfortable conversation with your kids, then you've created the shame that they carry that prevents them from talking to you about these kind of problems. But if you just say, hey, look, it's uncomfortable, let's talk about it anyways, then no matter what the topic is, there's that sense of trust that as a parent, even if I am disappointed in the decisions that my children make, I love them, I support them, I want the best for them, and I will help them through any problem that exists.
One of the times that I love to have these sorts of conversations is after I've picked my son up from ultimate frisbee practice or school or whatever, because if they're in the car with you, it means you're both looking the same way. You don't have to have that uncomfortable eye contact. Sometimes that's a little bit easier. It also means that they can't jump out and leave. So that is a great time to have these sorts of conversations.
Yeah, and that's great. Psychologically, that has been proven as well. It's very disarming for people to be in a vehicle, and it's a lot easier to have conversations where you don't have the obligation of direct eye contact, or your sullen teenager staring at the floor while you're trying to get them to engage in a conversation.
I mean, you're absolutely right on the psychological note, and I'm you both are obviously well versed in that. It's easier to have a conversation that might feel uncomfortable when you're not looking at each other, and like the psychological impact of that. How have we decided that 33% is the number of adult content allowed before we deem that there's a psychological impact for kids of adult content on websites?
Some of this, I will just be honest, as lawyers just pick numbers because we have to pick a number. And so that seems to make sense. A lot of times we're negotiating around like specific case instances, right? And yeah, you just got to pick a number and put it somewhere. And I think that's kind of where that landed.
I think it's also related to the tech super PACs that get together and decide whether they're going to fight a law tooth and nail or if they're going to support it. And when you're talking about giant tech platforms like social media, who determines what percent of content is adult? How do you group the content? Is it a post? Is it the number of comments on a post? Is it the number of communities that have adult content in them? And so each of those different ways of grouping and categorization will lead to a different percentage of overall content that would fall under the law. And so again, big tech is designed in a way that is always weighing risk and reward. And so at 33%, social media doesn't qualify, but porn sites do. But yet, kids see the vast majority of adult content on their feed. It's there, not necessarily the adult website itself, but even if we looked at just adult websites, there is too many of them. I think, for governments to actually effectively enforce the laws. And if we enforce one but not the other 3.99 million, did we solve anything? So, like, I see various different adult websites in the news with different kinds of litigation pending against them. But the worst ones, the ones that still host CSAM and non consensual content, they're not in the news. No one's looking at them. The risk level for them is significantly lower than the big guys. And they're also the ones that don't have any age barriers in place for kids, and no one is filing lawsuits against them. So, how do we move that needle forward in a way that makes a law like Texas's, which had this huge Supreme Court victory that paved the way for the rest of the nation here? How do we move the needle forward on what does enforcement look like for that?
Yeah, and again, our our office, our division has both civil and criminal lawyers. Some of this is figuring out from a law enforcement perspective which one of these is actually going to work, because sometimes we have found there are certain problems that our criminal tools don't work at all on, and we have to pursue it through some sort of civil action. And there's also places that we find that our civil tools don't work, and we really need to just criminalize someone and send them to prison. So there's a lot of this that I think is going to be ongoing negotiation, sort of like between law enforcement, between big tech, and between both of us and reality of how these cases are actually going to get generated and get resolved.
Yeah, I think unfortunately the harsh truth is also that the Texas government, if we look at the AG office specifically, only has so much time and so much manpower. So the enforcement question is, it's still a question. You only can really go after the most heinous acts and the worst of this. But there's so many more of those 3.99 million sites that are flying under the radar. So it's difficult.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have really tried to do is draft in as many people to help us as possible. So, for instance, on our enforcement for illicit massage businesses, we can't visit every single massage business. Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation can't visit every single massage business. They're on I think, a 3 or 4 year visit cycle. Everybody gets visited in that 3 or 4 years. But one thing that we can do is I go to trainings, I talk all around the state, and I talk with fire marshals. I talk with code enforcement officers, and I say, hey, look, you guys are in this business anyway. If you're looking for sprinklers, you don't have to close your eyes to everything else you see. And so if we can draft in people to really help us with these issues, whether that's an illicit massage business or whether that's a website hosting CSAM, if we have other people who have eyes on these problems that are coming to us and say, hey, let me help you out, let me serve one up to you here, that's really helpful to us.
You mentioned illicit massage practices. How big of a problem is that in Texas?
So here's the example that I give to everyone. There are about the same number of illicit massage businesses in Texas as there are Starbucks. So every time you see a Starbucks, think that you're also seeing an illicit massage business or a brothel. And if you do that, that gives you an idea for what that problem is. What I will say is we often work cases where we have a Starbucks and an IMB in the same shopping center, right? So not only see one, think one, but see one, look down that shopping strip to see what else you're seeing. So there's some things that we see that are really commonly associated with that. Front windows that are completely blacked out. You can't see inside at all. Maybe it's covered with tint or covered with advertisements. Hours that only start late in the evening and go way into the night, a clientele that's exclusively male, those sorts of things are often our dead giveaways. But it's a big problem that we have to work a lot with. And it's a lot of working with landlords and working with local municipalities as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago and I saw some data. I live in Colorado, but I live in the northern and I would never have thought that illicit massage practices would be a problem here. Now, Denver, sure, I would have told you absolutely there's a problem in Denver. And then I saw this data, and literally 5 miles up the street from me is a hot spot. And so I think for everyone that's listening here, you have a problem too. Whether you think you do or not, you have a problem. Sexual exploitation and trafficking is happening everywhere in the US, across the globe. Like, this is a problem that we all collectively have to figure out how to solve for, because it isn't someone else's problem.
On that note specifically, the people who are unaware are because they're not looking for it. Those are the people that we're trying to make aware. You are not being fed the content that kids are being fed because you don't operate as a child. You are not aware of the amount of illicit massage parlors because you're not looking for them. So it's all happening right under your nose. And that's really why we're even having this conversation, is to help get more parents and adults aware of the potential harm. Unfortunately, it's not, as Sarah has said many times, it's not the van on the side of the corner. It's not just the massage parlor. It's not just men and women being trafficked against their will, although that is still very active. It is everywhere.
One of the things that Texas has worked a lot on is training and awareness campaigns for people who might come in contact with human trafficking victims. So there's mandatory training for barbers and cosmetologists. We've just added some training for nail salons and tattoo and piercing studios. Texas was the first in the nation to require all rideshare drivers to have human trafficking training awareness for them. So both Uber and Lyft both have very good programs. I got to help review those programs and make sure that they hit all the high notes. Lyft delivers it as an in-app training to their drivers. Uber has it available on their website. You can Google Uber human trafficking and see what they're doing. They worked with Polaris Project, some really great stuff that is coming out of that that really is geared to making sure that there's an awareness and, again, more eyes on the problem. I was in Louisiana recently, traveling to speak with the Louisiana Children's Advocacy Centers, and every time I got in an Uber and told the Uber driver why I was there, they were like, tell me more, what do I need to know? I think there's a lot of appetite. People really want to know, really do want to help. And it's incumbent on people like Sarah and I to give those tools over to them so that they can help us.
Yeah, absolutely. What can we leave people with? Is there anything that they can either do to help or just be aware of?
Sarah?
I think it's all about that awareness, right? And again, it's not someone else's problem. If you look by the numbers, I think it's 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people have been the victim of some sort of sexual crime. The number is staggering. So think about the number of people that are in your sphere of influence, or that you know through your kid's school, through whatever activity, youth, sports, whatever. If you start to think about that number of people, stop thinking it's someone else's problem and start being that part of community that is trusted, that can help in a crisis. And my kids, I want them and their friends to know, you can come to our house. It is a safe place. You can come to me and talk if you need to. The more that parents have that mentality, which comes from having awareness of the problem itself, the better that we all collectively can stop this problem.
Yeah, I will absolutely echo that. Again, just that thinking through, what is a child going to do if they need to go to someone, but as an adult, what are you going to do if a child comes to you? You have to have that thought process through. And so the first thing I would say is believe kids, accept their language, accept that they might not talk about it in the same way that you would. But then once you do realize what's going on, please get them to a children's advocacy center, a youth treatment facility, something that can really engage with them in an age appropriate way. The other thing that I would do is I always put this sort of plea out there. Please show up to jury duty when you get your card. We try cases all across the state. I've tried them in big jurisdictions and small jurisdictions, and we always end up having to call 200 to 300 people, maybe 500 people, to have enough people show up that I can actually get a jury. And so I need 12 or 14 people, and we have to call 500. get that. Show up to jury duty, because the good news is I tried 2 of these cases to verdict last summer and got multiple life sentences in every single case, right? When we have these cases, when we can show up, when we've got community members who show up and listen, and a judge that takes the time, and we can get good verdicts, we can protect our kids, but we need everybody to show up and do that.
And I would just say by doing what you do, Brody, you're giving hope and control and power back to those kids. And so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the work that you do. I know that it cannot be easy to see the things that you have to see on a daily basis, but I know how meaningful that part of the process is to closure and moving forward and not being stuck in the past.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate all of our partners that make what we do possible. So thank you for your work as well.